My mother always insisted that rich men hide two things: dirty money and midnight phone calls. I dismissed her warnings, believing my husband was the exception to her bitter rule. That changed on our 10th anniversary when I heard a soft whisper drift from his locked office. I realized then that to dismantle a dynasty, one does not use a sledgehammer. You simply remove the foundation bricks one by one while the emperor is fast asleep. My name is Alara Sterling. At 32 years old, I spend my days breathing life back into the forgotten. As a professional art restorer, I live in the quiet details, fixing cracks in varnish and mending tears in canvas that others might overlook. My world is built on patience, silence, and the steady hand required to peel back layers of grime to reveal the truth underneath. It is a cruel irony that I applied none of this scrutiny to my own marriage until the damage was already irreparable. Grant Sterling was the masterpiece I thought I had secured. At 40 years old, my husband was the CEO of Omnicore Systems, a man whose face graced the covers of tech magazines and whose charm could disarm the most hostile board members. We lived in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, a glass cage floating above the city that cost $15 million. It was beautiful, pristine, and suffocatingly cold. Grant filled the silence between us with diamond bracelets and weekend trips to private islands, substituting intimacy with currency. I accepted it because I told myself that a man building a global empire does not have time for long dinners or Sunday walks. I convinced myself that his distraction was a form of dedication. My mother, Beatrice, saw things differently. After 3 failed marriages, she viewed men through a lens of cynical exhaustion. I remember the day I showed her my engagement ring. She did not gasp or cry with joy. She simply took a sip of her martini and looked me dead in the eye. "Alara, listen to me," she had said, her voice rough with smoke and experience. "Men like Grant don't cheat with lipstick on the collar. They cheat with silence. Watch out for the calls he never takes in front of you. That is where the rot starts." I dismissed her as bitter and paranoid. Grant was different. He was the man who flew home early from Tokyo just to attend my gallery opening, even if he spent the whole night on his phone. He was the devoted husband the public adored. I was the envy of New York, and I let that vanity blind me to the reality right in front of my face. The shift was subtle at first, like a hairline fracture in a porcelain vase that is invisible to the naked eye. It started with the midnight wanderings. Grant would slip out of bed thinking I was asleep and retreat to his home office. It was soundproofed, naturally. He claimed it was for my benefit, so his late-night conference calls with Singapore would not disturb my rest. Then came the digital walls. One evening, I playfully reached for his phone to check the weather. He snatched it away with a speed that startled us both. "Sorry, honey," he said, his smile tight and practiced. "New company policy. 2-factor authentication and biometric locks only. We are dealing with sensitive IP right now. I can't have anyone accessing it." He set the phone face down. I noticed later that his messages were set to auto-delete every 24 hours. "Security," he said. I nodded, swallowing the lie because it was easier than tasting the truth. The fracture snapped open on a Tuesday. It was 2 in the morning. I woke up thirsty and noticed Grant's side of the bed was empty. I assumed he was in the office again, but as I walked past the walk-in closet, I saw a faint, rhythmic glow. I walked barefoot across the marble floor, making no sound. Grant's suit from the day before was hanging on the valet stand. He was not in the room, but inside the inner pocket of his jacket, a light pulsed. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was not his primary phone. It was a sleek burner device, vibrating silently against the silk lining. I stared at the screen as a notification flashed and then vanished into the darkness. I did not reach for it. I did not storm into his office to demand answers. I stood there in the dark, shivering not from the air conditioning but from a sudden, hollow realization. My mother's voice echoed in my head, louder than the wind howling outside the penthouse. The blind trust I had held for 10 years began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, calculating unease. I began to study my husband with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. I watched the way his hand jerked away from his laptop whenever I walked into the room, a reflex he tried to mask with a casual stretch. I catalogued the scent that clung to his collar, a heavy, cloying note of sandalwood and amber that was definitely not the crisp, citrus cologne he had worn for a decade. It was a foreign contaminant on the canvas of our life. Wednesday morning, Grant dropped the lie while buttering his toast. "I have to fly to Miami this weekend," he said, his eyes fixed on the news scrolling across his tablet. "There is a virtual tech summit. It is a bore. I know, but I need to put in an appearance for the investors. It looks bad if the CEO is absent." I nodded, sipping my coffee to hide the twitch in my jaw. Later that afternoon, I accessed the Omnicore public schedule. There was no summit, no conference, nothing. I called his executive assistant, a woman named Sarah who had always smiled too brightly at me. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling," she chirped. "Yes, the Miami trip. It came up. Very suddenly. Top secret industry standards. You know how it is." She was lying. I could hear the rehearsal in her voice. That night at 11 o'clock, I stood in the hallway outside his study. The door was closed, the heavy oak usually acting as a sound barrier, but tonight it was cracked open just a fraction of an inch. I stopped breathing. I pressed myself against the wall, becoming part of the architecture. "She doesn't suspect anything," Grant whispered. The tone was intimate, conspiratorial. "Don't worry. Monica, I will be there on Friday." Monica. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I retreated to the bedroom before he could catch me, my mind racing. I mentally flipped through the Rolodex of every socialite, colleague, and acquaintance we had ever met. There were 3 Monicas in our circle, but none fit the tone of that whisper. This was someone else. I did not confront him. Confrontation is messy, and it allows the other party to build defenses. Instead, I went into restoration mode. When you repair a priceless painting, you do not take a knife to the canvas. You gently dissolve the layers of dirt to find the cracks. I started with our finances. I combed through the joint accounts, looking for hotel charges, jewelry purchases, or expensive dinners. There was nothing. It was spotless. Grant was too intelligent to leave a digital footprint that his wife could track with a simple password. But arrogance always leaves a physical trace. On Thursday morning, while Grant was in the shower, I went into his home office. I did not touch the computer. I went for the trash. Buried under a pile of shredded documents was a crumpled ball of paper. He must have missed the bin's liner or intended to burn it later. I smoothed it out on the desk. It was a dry cleaning receipt for a navy blazer. The date was from 2 days ago. But the delivery address was not our penthouse, nor was it the Omnicore headquarters. It was for a unit at the Obsidian, a residential tower on the Upper East Side known for its celebrity tenants and impenetrable privacy. Unit 42B. We did not own an apartment at the Obsidian. I took a photo of the receipt and placed the paper back exactly where I found it. Grant walked out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, smiling at me as if he were the same man I married 10 years ago. "Going to pack for me?" "Honey?" he asked, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I forced a smile, fighting the urge to recoil from the smell of sandalwood that still lingered on his skin. "Of course," I said. "I want you to look your best for Miami." I decided then I would not be following him to the airport. When his plane supposedly took off for Florida, I would be taking a taxi to the Upper East Side. Friday morning arrived with a suffocating layer of normalcy. I stood by the front door, straightening Grant's tie with hands that I willed not to tremble. He looked dashing in his travel suit, the very image of a devoted husband reluctantly leaving his wife for business. "I will miss you," he said, leaning down to brush his lips against my forehead. "I will call you as soon as I get to the hotel. Safe flight." "Darling," I replied, my voice steady. "Don't work too hard. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, hiding his polished smile, my performance ended. I did not collapse. I did not pace. I moved with the efficiency of a soldier. I grabbed my oversized tote bag, which contained not lipstick and magazines, but my Canon R5 with a telephoto lens, a tool usually reserved for documenting the microscopic hairline cracks in Renaissance oil paintings. I drove my own car, a nondescript sedan I rarely used, and headed straight for the Upper East Side. My destination was the Obsidian. The building was a fortress of black glass and steel, screaming money and exclusion. I walked into the lobby with my chin high, wearing a pair of sunglasses that cost more than most people's rent. I am here to inquire about the unit on the 42nd floor, I told the concierge, feigning the boredom of the ultra-wealthy. I heard it might be coming to market privately. The concierge hesitated, scanning my attire before his posture relaxed. I am afraid that unit is occupied, ma'am, but we do have. No matter. I cut him off, having confirmed what I needed. The floor was residential, not corporate. I turned on my heel and exited before he could ask for a name. I set up camp in a French bistro directly across the street. I ordered a pot of tea and opened a book I had no intention of reading. Restoration work had taught me that patience is not just a virtue, it is a weapon. You have to wait for the solvents to work. You have to wait for the glue to set. I sat there for 4 hours, watching the revolving doors of the Obsidian spin like a carousel of greed. At 2 in the afternoon, a low growl echoed off the canyon of buildings. A silver Porsche 911 GT3 pulled up to the curb. My breath hitched. Grant had told me he sold that car last year because it was too flashy for a CEO focusing on sustainability. Yet there it was, gleaming in the sun, with my husband behind the wheel. He did not get out immediately. He waited. A moment later, the revolving doors of the building spun, and a woman stepped out. I froze. I knew her. Not socially, but professionally. It was Monica Vance. She was impossible to miss. Sharp features, immaculate tailoring, and an air of terrifying competence. 6 months ago, I had read a profile on her in Forbes magazine titled The Queen of Crisis. She was a high-powered PR consultant known for burying scandals for the elite. Now, she was the scandal. She walked toward the car with a predatory grace. Grant stepped out to meet her. In the middle of the sidewalk, in broad daylight, he pulled her close. He did not kiss her the way he kissed me this morning. He kissed her with a hunger I had not felt from him in years. His hands roamed her back, possessing her, claiming her. I did not scream. I lifted my camera. Through the viewfinder, the world narrowed down to a single, sharp focus. Click. Grant's hand in her hair. Click. Monica's head thrown back in laughter. Click. The license plate of the ghost car. Click. I zoomed in on his face. He looked alive. He looked happy. Lowering the camera, I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing weight of heartbreak to buckle my knees. But it never arrived. Instead, a strange, icy clarity settled over me. It was the feeling of standing in a gallery after hours, the air conditioning humming, the lights stark and unforgiving. The man I loved had died on that sidewalk. What remained was a target. So that is how it is. I whispered to the empty chair across from me. I signaled the waiter for the check. I had a lot of work to do. Upon returning to the penthouse, I did not collapse into a heap of despair. Instead, I walked straight into my restoration studio and locked the door. This room was my sanctuary, filled with the smell of turpentine and varnish, but now it served a different purpose. I took a large canvas, a reproduction of a stormy seascape I had been working on, and flipped it around. On the back, I taped the photographs I had taken of Grant and Monica. It was no longer just art, it was a war room hidden in plain sight. I pulled my copy of our prenuptial agreement from the safe. It was a document thick enough to be a novel, drafted by the most ruthless lawyers in New York. Under normal circumstances, a divorce would leave me with a pittance, barely enough to rent a studio apartment in Brooklyn. But as I scanned the dense legal jargon, I found the loophole. I remembered the morality clause. If Grant's actions caused significant reputational damage to Omnicore systems, the prenup would be voided. Adultery alone was not enough, but adultery mixed with financial misconduct. That was the key. I needed more than grainy photos of a kiss. I needed a paper trail. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. Jax was a former colleague who had pivoted from restoring Renaissance pigments to restoring corrupted hard drives. In our circle, we jokingly called him a digital restorer, but in reality, he was a hacker of the highest order. Ilara, his voice crackled with surprise. "It's been a long time. I need a favor." "Jax," I said, my voice devoid of pleasantries. "I need to see what is happening on a tablet that is on a secure network." "Can you help me send me the serial number?" He replied. "I will send you a link. Once it is opened on the device, I am in." Grant returned Sunday evening, playing the part of the exhausted conqueror. He carried a gift bag from a boutique in the Miami airport, though I knew he had bought the silk scarf inside at a shop on Madison Avenue just hours ago. The summit was brutal. Grant sighed, loosening his tie. Non-stop meetings about blockchain integration. "I missed you, Ilara." I took the scarf and wrapped it around my neck, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "You poor thing," I cooed. "You sound congested. Did you catch a cold on the plane?" "Maybe." He sniffed. "My head is pounding." "Go change," I said, guiding him toward the bedroom. "I will make you my special herbal tea. It will knock that cold right out of you." I went to the kitchen and brewed a strong cup of chamomile. Into the steaming mug, I crushed 2 heavy-strength cold and flu tablets, the kind that guarantee 8 hours of comatose sleep. Grant drank it gratefully, and within 20 minutes, he was snoring softly in our king-sized bed. I waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Then, I moved. I retrieved the second phone from his suit jacket, which he had carelessly left on the chair. It was locked. Of course. I sat on the edge of the bed and gently lifted Grant's right hand. He groaned slightly, shifting in his sleep, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "Shh. It's okay, darling," I whispered, stroking his hair with one hand while guiding his thumb to the sensor with the other. The screen unlocked with a soft click. I did not waste time reading love letters. I went straight to the email and banking apps. What I found made the air leave my lungs. Grant and Monica were not just sleeping together, they were building a lifeboat. I found dozens of emails referring to Mon Gras Holdings, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. They were siphoning money. Grant was approving inflated invoices from Monica's consulting firm and diverting Omnicore funds into this offshore account. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. I pulled a small encrypted hard drive from my pocket and connected it to the phone, copying every email, every text message, and every bank transfer receipt. As the progress bar crawled toward 100%, I opened a draft email Grant had written to his lawyer. "Timeline looks good." The draft read, "Once the assets are fully transferred to Mon Gras in July, I will file for divorce. Ilara will get the standard payout, which will be nothing compared to what we are holding. She is too naive to audit the books. I will be free by August." I stared at the words. He was planning to strip me of everything, to leave me with nothing but a used surname and a broken heart. The transfer notification dinged softly. Download complete. I wiped the phone clean of my fingerprints, placed it back in his jacket, and looked at my sleeping husband. Naive. I whispered into the darkness. "We will see about that." I left the room, the hard drive burning a hole in my pocket. He wanted to leave me with nothing. I decided then that I would return the favor. The war began not with a scream, but with a whisper over a plate of seared scallops. We were eating dinner in the dining room, the silence between us only broken by the clinking of silverware. Grant was scrolling through his phone, likely checking the illicit accounts I had already cloned, completely unaware that I was watching him from across the table. I was thinking of commissioning a new portrait for the hallway, I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. I found a wonderful artist today. Her name is Monica. The effect was instantaneous. Grant choked on his water, coughing violently as he slammed the glass down onto the table. Water sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth. His eyes darted up to meet mine, wide with a panic he could not suppress in time. He wheezed, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Monica," I repeated, smiling innocently. "Monica Vitti." The Italian actress, I saw a vintage print of her. Grant exhaled, his shoulders sagging as the adrenaline left his system. "Right," he muttered, picking up his fork with a hand that shook ever so slightly. I thought you meant someone else." "Who else would I mean, darling?" I asked, taking a slow sip of wine. He did not answer. He did not have to. The terror in his eyes was the most satisfying meal I had eaten in years. From that night on, I began to change. I shed the skin of the patient, beige-wearing wife. I cut my hair into a sharp bob that framed my face like a helmet of war. I traded my sensible flats for 4-inch stilettos that clicked against the marble floors like gunshots. When I walked into a room, I no longer blended into the background. I demanded attention. Grant noticed. He would stare at me while I applied blood-red lipstick in the mirror, his expression a mix of confusion and arousal. I was becoming unpredictable, and for a man who thrived on control, I was terrifying. But my transformation was not just for him. It was a costume for my new role. I enrolled in a high-end evening seminar titled Brand Dominance, taught by none other than Monica Vance. I registered under the name Clara Stone, a freelance art consultant looking to expand her business. The first night of class, I sat in the front row. Monica was charismatic. I had to give her that. She stalked the stage like a panther, talking about narrative control and power dynamics. After the lecture, I approached her, playing the part of the wide-eyed admirer to perfection. "Ms. Vance," I said, clasping my hands together. "That was brilliant. You are truly inspiring." Monica preened. Flattery was her currency, and I was paying in bulk. By the third session, Clara Stone and Monica were having drinks at a trendy bar near the lecture hall. It did not take much prodding to get her to talk about her personal life. People who think they are smarter than everyone else usually cannot resist bragging. Men are simple creatures. "Clara," Monica said, swirling her martini. "They want what they can't have, and once they have it, they get bored. My current guy, he is a CEO, brilliant, wealthy, powerful. He sounds amazing," I said, leaning in. "Is he married?" Monica laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Technically," she smirked, "but his wife. She is a ghost. She is so boring. She sits at home and plays with old paintings while he runs the world. He told me he is leaving her. He just needs to move some assets first so she doesn't get a dime." My hand tightened around my purse, where my recorder was capturing every word. "That sounds complicated," I said. "Not for me," Monica replied, checking her reflection in her spoon. "I win. I always win." When I returned to the penthouse that night, it was past midnight. Grant was waiting in the living room, pacing back and forth. He looked disheveled, his tie undone. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I called you 3 times. "I was out," I said simply, dropping my keys on the table. Out with who he stepped closer, sniffing the air, perhaps checking for the scent of another man. "You have been gone every Tuesday and Thursday. You are dressing differently. You act distant." I looked at him, suppressing the urge to laugh. He was jealous. The man who was funneling millions into an offshore account to abandon me, was jealous that I might be stepping out on him. "I am just finding myself again." "Grant," I said, walking past him toward the bedroom. "Don't worry so much. You look tired." His jealousy was a gift. As long as he was obsessed with the idea that I was having an affair, he was not looking at his bank alerts. He was guarding the bedroom door while I was dismantling the foundation of his house. The breakthrough came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Jack sent me a secure message containing a single file named The Smoking Gun. I opened it in my studio, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. It was not just proof of an affair, it was a roadmap of a crime. Jax called me a moment later. "Alara, are you looking at page 3? He asked, his voice low and serious. "I am," I replied, staring at the glowing screen. "What am I looking at?" "Exactly. Grant didn't just use his own bonus to buy that apartment for Monica." Jax explained. He used Omnicore operational funds. He categorized a $4 million real estate purchase as server farm infrastructure expansion in the quarterly report. That is not just cooking the books. Alara, that is embezzlement. That is fraud against shareholders. If the SEC sees this, he goes to prison for 10 to 15 years. I leaned back in my chair. Prison. The stakes had just shifted from a messy divorce to a federal indictment. I took the evidence to Arthur Penhaligon, my mother's oldest friend and the most vicious divorce attorney in the state. He was a man who viewed marriage as a contract and divorce as a surgical procedure. He reviewed the documents in silence, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "This is beautiful," Arthur murmured, tapping a manicured finger on the bank transfer record. "We don't just have him on a morality clause violation. We have him on criminal negligence. We can freeze his assets before he even knows he has been served. When do you want to drop the hammer Saturday?" I said without hesitation. "The Omnicore 20th anniversary gala." It was the perfect stage. Grant was obsessed with his public image. He had invited every major shareholder, the press, and the city's elite to celebrate his genius. He would be broadcasting his speech live to global investors. I could not have built a better trap if I had tried. The night before the gala, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with tension. Grant was pacing the living room, rehearsing his speech. He was nervous. He needed everything to be perfect because, as I now knew, the company's finances were a house of cards he was desperately trying to hold together. "I need to check the slide deck," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "The new projection charts need to be uploaded." "I can do it," I offered, looking up from my book. "You look exhausted." "Grant, go take a shower. I will transfer the files to the main server for you. I know how important the visual quality is." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw hesitation. But then he saw the dutiful, supportive wife he thought he had trained so well. "Fine," he said. "Just don't touch anything else. Just the upload." He went to the bathroom. I moved to his laptop. My hands were steady. Years of restoring paintings had given me the ability to work with microscopic precision. I opened his presentation file. I did not delete his charts. Instead, I inserted a new sequence of media files into the middle of his speech, masking them under the file names of his boring revenue graphs. I synced the audio trigger to the moment he was scheduled to talk about transparency. It took me 5 minutes. When he came back, the laptop was closed, and I was sipping tea. "All done," I said. Grant nodded, not even saying thank you. He was too busy texting on his second phone. The next evening, as we were getting dressed for the event, the final blow landed. I was adjusting my earrings when Grant walked up behind me. He looked at my reflection in the mirror, his expression critical. "Listen, Alara," he said, straightening his bow tie. "Monica Vance will be there tonight. She is handling the press. Be polite to her." I met his eyes in the mirror. I am always polite. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt heavy and possessive. "And when we are on stage, just stand there and smile," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And don't say anything stupid. The investors want to see a supportive wife, not a partner. Just look pretty." I felt a smile spread across my face, genuine and terrifying. He had no idea he was talking to his executioner. "Don't worry, darling," I said softly. "I will leave everyone speechless." The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a cavern of crystal and gold, suffocating under the weight of 500 of New York's most influential parasites. It was the 20th anniversary of Omnicore Systems, and Grant had spared no expense. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and the desperate ambition of people trying to stay relevant. I arrived 15 minutes late by design. For a decade, I had been the beige wife, the woman in pastel chiffon who blended into the wallpaper so her husband could shine. Tonight, I was the fire that would burn the house down. I wore a gown of crimson silk, backless and structured, the color of a fresh wound or perhaps a warning sign. When I stepped into the light of the foyer, the conversation in the room didn't just fade, it severed. Grant was standing near the ice sculpture, holding a glass of champagne. When he saw me, his composure fractured. He blinked, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had crashed his party. "Alara," he murmured as I approached, his eyes scanning the plunging neckline of my dress. "You look intense." Standing beside him, acting as the media liaison, was Monica. She wore black, sleek, and severe. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a microscopic sneer that only another woman would catch. She leaned in close to Grant's ear, assuming the din of the crowd would mask her voice. "She looks desperate," Monica whispered, her voice like sandpaper wrapped in velvet. "The poor thing is trying too hard. It's sad, really." I offered them both a radiant, razor-sharp smile. "Happy anniversary. Darling," I said, ignoring her completely. "I hope you are ready for the surprise." I did not stay by his side. I moved through the room like a shark in a koi pond. I targeted the key shareholders, the men and women whose money fueled Grant's ego. I found Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board, near the bar. "It is a lovely party." "Alara," he said, raising his glass. "It certainly is," I replied, keeping my voice low. Grant wanted to go all out. He said that with the creative accounting on the new merger. We have plenty of cash to burn. Though I admit, I don't quite understand what he meant by hiding the losses in the Cayman Shell Company. High finance is so over my head. I watched the color drain from Mr. Henderson's face. I repeated this performance 3 times, planting tiny, poisonous seeds of doubt in the most fertile soil I could find. By the time the lights dimmed, the tension in the room was palpable to everyone but Grant. He bounded onto the stage, bathed in a spotlight that made him look like a savior. He adjusted the microphone, flashing his $1,000,000 smile. Monica stood in the wings, her arms crossed, watching him with a look of possessive triumph. She thought she was watching her future unfold. She was right, but not in the way she imagined. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant's voice boomed. 20 years ago, I started Omnicore with a dream built on integrity, on transparency, on the values of family and trust. We do not cut corners. We do not hide in the shadows. I sat at the center table, directly in his line of sight. I picked up my glass of Pinot Noir, swirling the dark liquid. I caught his eye and raised the glass in a mock toast. He faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, before he returned to his script. "And tonight," he continued, gesturing to the massive LED screen behind him which displayed a rising stock graph, "I want to show you exactly where we are going." I placed my glass on the table. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened a text thread with the audio technician in the back of the room, a man named Dave, whose son's tuition I had anonymously paid off yesterday after learning Grant had denied him a promised bonus. I typed 2 words, "Burn it." I hit send. On stage. Grant turned to point at the screen, expecting to see the projections for the next quarter. The screen flickered violently. The pristine blue and white graphics dissolved into static, and then the image resolved into something else entirely. It was not the quarterly revenue projections, but a grainy, handheld video clip I had secretly recorded during one of my coffee sessions with Monica. Her face, magnified to 10 feet high, filled the room. Her lips were curled in that familiar, arrogant sneer that she usually reserved for waiters and assistants. "The board, please." Her digital voice boomed through the surround sound speakers, crisp and undeniable. Those old dinosaurs wouldn't know a crisis if it bit them. Grant has them eating out of his hand. We will bleed the accounts dry before they even wake up from their naps. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating vacuum that precedes an explosion. 500 people stopped breathing at once. Then, the sound returned not as applause, but as a low, buzzing hive of confusion and outrage that quickly grew into a roar. But I was not done. The video cut abruptly to a slideshow of documents. These were not the sanitized versions Grant showed the public. These were the screenshots from his secret tablet. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands scrolled past, with bright red highlights circling transfers of $200,000, $500,000, and finally, a lump sum of $4 million moved from Omnicore Operational to Mon Gras Holdings. Grant stood frozen at the podium. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning but had not yet fallen over. He had forgotten the most basic rule of public speaking. The microphone was still clipped to his lapel, and it was live. Every sharp, ragged intake of breath he took was amplified across the room. "No," he wheezed, the sound echoing like a ghost. "No, this is a mistake." In the wings, Monica realized what was happening. She lunged toward the audiovisual booth, her face twisted in a mask of panic. She screamed something unintelligible, reaching for the power cords to kill the feed. But before she could take 3 steps, a large security guard stepped in her path. I had personally hired him that morning and given him very specific instructions regarding Ms. Vance. "You don't have clearance." "Ma'am," he said, blocking her with a wall of muscle. The screen shifted one last time. It went black, leaving only audio. It was a recording from the night I drugged Grant's tea, taken from the voice memo app on his own phone where he liked to dictate his plans. "Once the liquidity transfer hits $10 million, Grant's recorded voice sneered, dripping with malice. "I will file the papers. I will kick Alara to the curb. She is too stupid to fight back. She will be lucky if I let her keep her paints." That was the match in the powder keg. The room erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as furious shareholders stood up, shouting demands for answers. The press, sensing blood in the water, unleashed a storm of camera flashes that turned the dim room into a strobe-lit nightmare. The light bounced off Grant's pale, sweating face. He looked small. He looked terrified. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my red dress and began to walk toward the stage. I moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The crowd parted for me, the sea making way for the storm. I climbed the stairs, the clicking of my heels audible even over the chaos. I walked up to Grant. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, shaking his head as if begging me to wake him from this nightmare. "Alara, please," he whispered, the mic catching every desperate syllable. "I can explain. I reached out and gently took the microphone from his trembling hand. I turned to face the blinding lights and the sea of angry faces. I did not shout. I did not cry. I spoke with the calm authority of a woman who had just finished a long, difficult restoration project. "Omnicore needs transparency," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I just brought it to you." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick envelope containing the divorce filing and the fraud evidence. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it onto his chest. It hit him with a dull thud before sliding to the floor. I dropped the microphone. The feedback screeched, a piercing wail that signaled the end of his empire. The doors to the ballroom burst open with a force that rivaled the initial explosion of the scandal. I had timed my email to the Securities and Exchange Commission perfectly, hitting send exactly 3 hours before the gala began. The team of federal agents, flanked by uniformed police officers, marched down the center aisle, pushing aside the stunned waiters and trembling shareholders. An agent in a Navy windbreaker stepped onto the stage, his voice cutting through the din. "Grant Sterling," he announced, holding up a piece of paper that looked like a death warrant for my husband's career. You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Grant did not fight. He stood there, limp and defeated, as the officer pulled his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and final. It was the only sound in the room for a heartbeat before the photographers went into a frenzy. They captured every angle of the golden boy of tech being shackled in his $5,000 tuxedo. I knew that image would be on the front page of every newspaper from New York to London by tomorrow morning. To my right, I saw movement. Monica was trying to slip away toward the service exit, shielding her face with her clutch. But the press was a hydra, and she was fresh meat. A wall of reporters cut off her escape, shoving microphones into her face. "Ms. Vance," a reporter shouted, "did you knowingly facilitate the transfer of illicit funds? Is it true you are the co-signer on the Cayman accounts?" "Get away from me," Monica shrieked, her composure shattering like cheap glass. I am a victim here. I didn't know anything." Her career as a crisis manager died in that scrum. No one hires a fixer who gets caught. I did not stay to watch them drag Grant away. I turned and walked toward the main exit. Journalists shouted my name, begging for a quote, for a tear, for anything. I gave them nothing but the back of my head. I walked out into the cool night air of Manhattan, slipped into the waiting town car, and closed the door. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "It is done." "Alara," Arthur said, his voice practically purring with satisfaction. "Because the fraud was committed to facilitate the affair. The morality clause in the prenup is shattered. It is null and void. We are going for 50% of the marital assets, plus punitive damages for emotional distress. You are going to walk away with half the kingdom." By the time I reached the penthouse, the news was reporting that Omnicore stock had plummeted 40% in after-hours trading. The board of directors had already convened an emergency meeting and issued a statement firing Grant effective immediately. I had 3 voicemails from the chairman, begging me to cooperate with their internal investigation to save what was left of the company. I ignored them. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the sofa. My phone rang again. It was a number from the local precinct. Against my better judgment, I answered. Alara Grant's voice was broken, a jagged whisper that sounded nothing like the arrogant man on stage. "Alara, please. You have to help me. They are talking about 20 years. Please, baby. I can fix this. We can fix this." I listened to his breathing, ragged and terrified. "Goodbye." "Grant," I said. I tapped the screen and blocked the number. I looked around the penthouse. It was silent. For years, this silence had felt lonely, a symbol of my isolation. But tonight, as I looked out at the city lights shimmering below, the silence felt different. It felt like oxygen. It felt like freedom. 3 months have passed since the gala, and the silence in my life is no longer heavy. It is serene. The divorce was finalized with shocking speed. Grant, desperate to show the judge some semblance of cooperation in hopes of a lighter sentence, signed every document Arthur placed in front of him without reading a single page. He gave up his rights to the penthouse, his cars, and the remaining liquid assets without a fight. He was too busy trying to stay out of prison to worry about fighting his wife. I did not keep the glass cage in the sky. I sold the penthouse for $18 million to a Russian oligarch who liked the view. I also liquidated every single share of Omnicore stock I owned just before the company was delisted and the assets were frozen. I took that blood money and turned it into something pure. I bought a warehouse in Chelsea with high ceilings and northern light. I opened a massive restoration studio and named it Veritas. Truth. It is a place where things are fixed, not hidden. Justice, it turns out, is quite efficient when the evidence is irrefutable. Last week, the gavel came down. Grant received 10 years in a federal penitentiary for securities fraud and embezzlement. Monica, thanks to her active role in the money laundering scheme, received 5 years. The judge also issued a lifetime ban preventing her from ever working in public relations or finance again. Her name, once a brand of crisis management, is now a cautionary tale. Yesterday, a package arrived at the studio from my mother. I opened the cardboard box to find an ancient, heavy brick of a Nokia phone from the 90s. Taped to the screen was a handwritten note in her sharp, angular script that read, simply, "I told you so." I stared at the object for a moment, and then a sound bubbled up from my chest. I laughed. It was not the polite, stifled chuckle I had perfected as a CEO's wife. It was a loud, unpolished, belly-shaking laugh that echoed off the brick walls of my new sanctuary. Beatrice was cynical. Yes, but she was right. Alara, a voice interrupted my moment. It was Julian, the architect I had hired to renovate the studio's west wing. He stood in the doorway, holding a set of blueprints. He was handsome in a rugged, honest way, with dust on his boots and no hair gel in sight. "I was wondering," he said, shifting his weight, "if you are free tonight, there is a new Italian place around the corner. I would love to take you." I looked at him. He was smiling, open and eager. The old Ilara would have said yes immediately, desperate to be wanted. The new Ilara hesitated. I walked over to him, wiping a smudge of varnish from my hands. "That sounds lovely." "Julian," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But let's see if you have any secret calls first." He blinked, confused, then chuckled, assuming it was a joke. I smiled back, but my eyes remained sharp. It was not a joke. I would never be blind again. I turned back to the canvas on my easel. It was a 17th century portrait covered in centuries of yellowed varnish and soot. I picked up my scalpel and a cotton swab dipped in solvent. With a steady hand, I scraped away the gray film. Underneath, a vibrant patch of azure blue emerged, bright and untouched by the years of grime. I had scrubbed away the dirt of my past. There was no forgiveness in my heart for Grant, and I did not want there to be. I had burned his world to the ground, and from the ash, I had built a masterpiece. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this story.